My world, once a comfortable space of predictable routines and familial warmth, began to shrink the day my sister, Chloe, announced her pregnancy. It wasn't the news itself that was the problem, it was the glint in my parents' eyes. It was a look I knew all too well, the look of a plan slotting perfectly into place. I was Alara, the responsible one, the fixer. While Chloe, the golden child, chased her dreams of being a social media influencer, I had pursued a practical degree in business administration, secured a stable job as a project coordinator, and meticulously saved my money. My parents, Helen and Richard, praised my sensibility, but I always felt it was a different kind of praise than they gave Chloe. Hers was for her sparkle, mine was for my utility. The official trap was sprung on a Sunday evening, under the guise of a celebratory family dinner. The air was thick with the scent of roast chicken and my mother's cloying perfume. "Alara, darling," my father began, placing his fork down with a sense of ceremony. "We need to talk about the future. Our future." My mother beamed, reaching across the table to pat Chloe's hand. "With the baby coming, things are going to change. Chloe will need support. A strong family unit is everything." I nodded, offering a placid smile. "Of course. I'll help out on weekends, whenever I can." This was the wrong answer. My father's smile tightened. We were thinking of something more permanent. More involved. He then laid out their grand vision. I was to quit my job, the one I had worked so hard for. I was to move back into my childhood bedroom. My role? To become the full-time, live-in nanny for Chloe's baby. They didn't use the word nanny, of course. They used phrases like primary support system, auntie in residence, and keeping it in the family. They painted it as a beautiful sacrifice, a noble contribution to our family's legacy. "Think about it, Alara," Chloe chimed in, her voice sweet and completely oblivious to the cage she was helping to build. "It would be so perfect. We could raise the baby together. It'll be just like when we were kids." The room felt hot, suffocating. They spoke of my career as a little job that I could easily put on hold. They dismissed my apartment, my independence, as a phase. When I tried to protest, to explain that I had my own life, my own dreams of starting a small graphic design business on the side, my mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that little art hobby? You can do that in your spare time, dear. When the baby is sleeping." They weren't asking, they were informing me of my new reality. They had decided my future without my consent. I was not a person with ambitions, but a tool to be used for my sister's convenience and my parents' grand vision of a perfect, self-contained family. The most chilling part was that they genuinely believed they were doing something wonderful for me, offering me a purpose they had deemed more worthy than my own. I looked from my father's expectant face to my mother's unwavering smile, to Chloe's blissful ignorance. In that moment, something inside me didn't just crack, it hardened into steel. I had spent 25 years being the good daughter, the reliable cog in the family machine. But I would not allow them to dismantle my life for their own comfort. "It's a lot to take in," I said, my voice carefully neutral, a mask of compliance sliding over my features. "Let me think about it." Relief washed over their faces. They thought they had one. "Of course, darling," my father said, leaning back in his chair, control reasserted. "Take a day or two. Your room will be ready by the weekend." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my own apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, a world of possibilities they wanted to extinguish. I opened my laptop, not to work on a graphic design project, but to book a one-way train ticket. I messaged my old college friend, Liam, the only person who knew about the stifling pressure of my family. "Emergency," I typed. "I need your help. I'm disappearing." His reply came back in seconds. "Tell me when and where." "I'll be there." My parents thought they were preparing my old room for my return. They had no idea I was preparing for my escape. They had offered me a gilded cage, believing I would be grateful for the shelter. They were about to discover that I would rather be free in a storm than a prisoner in their perfect, golden world. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in quiet rebellion. On the surface, I was the dutiful daughter, a little overwhelmed but compliant. I answered my mother's calls about what colors she should paint my old room. I listened to Chloe's endless chatter about baby names and stroller brands. Each conversation was a knife twisting in my gut, fueling the cold resolve that had settled deep in my bones. While they planned my future, I was systematically erasing it from their grasp. My first stop was the bank. I withdrew the majority of my savings in cash, a significant sum I had built through years of frugal living and freelance work they knew nothing about. It felt heavy and powerful in my hands, the physical weight of my freedom. I packed one large suitcase in a backpack, not with the sentimental junk of my childhood, but with the essentials for a new life, my professional clothes, my powerful laptop and drawing tablet, and every important document I owned. The rest of my apartment, the furniture, the kitchenware, was just stuff. It could be replaced. My life could not. The most difficult part was writing the letter. I sat for an hour staring at a blank page, my hand trembling. What could I possibly say that they would understand? In the end, I chose clarity over emotion. Mom, Dad, Chloe. I will not be moving back home. I will not be quitting my job to raise Chloe's child. My life, my career, and my future are my own, and they are not up for family negotiation. You did not ask me, you informed me of a decision you made about my life. That is not love, and it is not family. It is control. I need space to live for myself. Do not try to contact me. Do not try to find me. When, and if, I am ready to speak to you again, it will be on my own terms. I hope one day you understand. Elara. I left it on the kitchen counter of my apartment, right where they'd see it when they inevitably came looking for me after I failed to show up. The escape was scheduled for Wednesday night, the evening before my supposed move-in. Liam pulled up in his beat-up sedan at the end of my street, just as planned. Throwing my bags in his trunk, I didn't look back at the apartment building. There were no tears, only a profound, heart-pounding sense of liberation. It was a terrifying leap into the unknown, but the alternative, a slow, suffocating erasure of self, was infinitely more frightening. We drove for 2 hours in comfortable silence before he finally spoke. You okay? I'm better than okay, I said, watching the city lights of my old life recede in the rearview mirror. I'm free. I stayed with him for 2 days in his small town before boarding a train to a city hundreds of miles away, a place where no one knew my name. The first thing I did upon arrival was buy a new SIM card. I blocked my parents' and Chloe's numbers. I deleted all my social media accounts. I became a ghost. Back home, the illusion shattered precisely on Thursday morning. My mother, armed with a box of my old high school trophies, used her spare key to enter my apartment, ready to help me pack. She found the empty closets, the bare shelves, and the letter on the counter. Her first call was to my father, her voice a shriek of disbelief and fury. She's gone, Richard. Everything's gone. She left a note, a horrible, ungrateful note. My father, a man who never lost his composure, was thunderstruck. Their plan, so perfect and logical in their minds, had been rejected. But it was worse than that, it was an act of outright defiance. Chloe's reaction was a storm of tears. But why would she do this? I needed her. How could she be so selfish? Their immediate assumption was that it was a tantrum. A dramatic gesture. She'll be back, my father declared, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. She has no one. She'll run out of money and come crawling home, begging for our forgiveness. But as the days turned into a week, and then 2, their anger curdled into a cold, gnawing panic. My phone went straight to a disconnected message. My email bounced back. Their calls to my workplace revealed I had resigned, citing personal reasons, a week prior. They had been completely outmaneuvered. The reliable, predictable Elara had vanished without a trace, taking with her not only her future but their absolute certainty of control. They were left with an empty room, a cruel letter, and the terrifying, dawning realization that they had no power over her at all. The game had changed. and they had already lost. 3 months passed. For me, they were a period of rebirth. For my family, they were the beginning of a slow-motion collapse. I had settled in a bustling, anonymous city on the coast. My small, one-bedroom apartment was sparse, but it was mine. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by the thrill of autonomy. I funneled all my energy into building the freelance graphic design business my parents had called a hobby. I created a professional portfolio, networked online, and took on small projects, working tirelessly from a small desk overlooking a street I didn't know. The work was demanding, but it was creatively fulfilling in a way my stable but soulless project coordinator job had never been. Every invoice I sent, every positive client review, was a brick in the foundation of my new life. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. There were moments, late at night, when a pang of guilt would strike. I missed the idea of my family, the comfortable memories of holidays and childhood. I especially wondered about my new niece or nephew. But then I would remember the suffocating expectation in their eyes, the casual dismissal of my entire being, and the guilt would recede, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty that I had made the right choice. Meanwhile, back in the home I'd fled, reality had set in with the force of a battering ram. Chloe had given birth to a baby girl named Lily. The idealized vision of motherhood she'd curated on her social media had collided with the messy, exhausting truth. Lily was not a perfect, sleeping prop for Instagram photos. She was a colicky baby who cried for hours on end, who needed feeding every 2 hours, and who cared nothing for Chloe's personal brand. Without me as the built-in, 24/7 support system, the burden fell squarely on my parents. My mother, Helen, who had envisioned herself as a glamorous grandmother making brief, photogenic appearances, was now a haggard, sleep-deprived caregiver. She spent her days changing diapers, trying to soothe a screaming infant, and cooking meals for a distraught Chloe. My father, Richard, who believed problems could be solved with authority and money, was finding the limits of both. He threw money at the problem, hiring expensive night nurses who quit after a week, buying top-of-the-line baby gear that did nothing to stop the crying, but the core issue remained. They had planned for a servant, not a family member, and now they were forced to do the work themselves. The cracks began to appear in their united front. I heard about it through the grapevine, a carefully worded email from a sympathetic cousin who I'd cautiously reconnected with, swearing her to secrecy. "Your mom and Chloe are fighting constantly," she wrote. "Chloe accuses your mom of not doing enough, and your mom says Chloe is ungrateful and has no idea how to be a mother. Your dad just stomps around the house, furious at the world. They hired a private investigator to find you, but you covered your tracks too well." The illusion of their perfect family was crumbling under the strain. The problem was no longer my selfishness, it was the screaming baby in the next room, the mounting credit card bills, and the sheer, grinding exhaustion. One evening, according to my cousin, the tension exploded. Chloe, sobbing in the kitchen after another sleepless night, screamed at my mother, "This isn't how it was supposed to be. You said Alara would handle all this." My mother, her face a mask of weary fury, had snapped back. "Well, your perfect plan didn't account for your sister having a spine. We are doing everything for you, and it's still not enough." My father had walked in on the shouting match, his face grim. "Enough," he'd bellowed, the sound echoing through the house. "This is our situation now. We will deal with it." But dealing with it was breaking them. They were trapped in the very cage they had designed for me. Every nappy they changed, every midnight feeding they handled, was a stark reminder of their miscalculation. They had believed I was a supporting character in their story, easily managed and controlled. They were now being forced to confront the gaping hole my absence had left, a void that was swallowing their money, their peace, and their carefully constructed fantasy of familial harmony. Their illusion of control wasn't just shattered, it was being ground to dust by the relentless reality of a crying child. 6 months after my departure, the cracks in my family's foundation had become gaping chasms. The initial crisis had morphed into a chronic, soul-crushing state of emergency. Lily was no longer a colicky newborn, she was a teething, crawling infant who demanded constant supervision. The workload had not lessened, it had simply changed shape. For me, life continued its upward trajectory. My freelance business was now stable enough that I was considering renting a small office space. I had made friends. I went hiking on weekends. I was dating a kind architect named Ben who found my story of escape not selfish, but brave. For the first time, I felt seen for who I was, not for what I could provide. My past life felt like a story about someone else. Back home, the unraveling was accelerating. The financial toll was the first to become undeniable. My father, Richard, was a man who prided himself on his financial acumen and his ability to provide. He sat at his mahogany desk one night, staring at their bank statements, his face ashen. Supporting a non-working Chloe and a baby was far more expensive than he had ever imagined. The cost of formula, diapers, clothes, and doctor visits was relentless. They had burned through their liquid savings and had been forced to dip into their retirement fund, a cardinal sin in his book. Their comfortable lifestyle was eroding, sacrificed at the altar of a grandchild they were now raising by default. His sense of control, so tied to his financial power, was slipping through his fingers like sand. The emotional toll was just as severe. My mother, Helen, had lost her sparkle. Her social life had vanished. Her friends' invitations for lunch or charity events were met with tired excuses. The fantasy of being the revered matriarch of a perfect family had been replaced by the grim reality of being an exhausted, unpaid babysitter. Her resentment towards Chloe simmered just below the surface. She saw her daughter, who still spent hours scrolling on her phone trying to maintain her influencer status, as a living monument to their failure. But the most significant shift was happening within Chloe. The fog of entitlement was finally beginning to lift, burned away by the harsh light of her new reality. Being a mother, a real one, was hard. It was lonely. She started to notice things she'd been blind to before: her mother's exhaustion, her father's constant stress. She also started to see her parents' manipulation for what it was. One afternoon, while searching for a document in my father's desk, she found the letter I had left. Her parents had hidden it from her, feeding her a narrative that I had simply abandoned her out of jealousy. Reading my words, unfiltered by their narrative, hit her with the force of a physical blow. "You did not ask me, you informed me. That is not love, it is control." She saw it all with devastating clarity: the Sunday dinner, her own casual dismissal of my life, her parents' calculated plan. They hadn't wanted to help her, they had wanted to acquire a permanent, cost-free solution to a problem. They had sacrificed her relationship with her sister for their own convenience. That evening, the final, spectacular unraveling occurred. Chloe confronted them in the living room, Lily asleep in her arms, my letter clutched in her hand. "You lied to me," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "You told me Alara was selfish. You told me she just ran off. You never let me read this." My mother started with a blustering defense. "We were protecting you. You were pregnant, stressed." "No." Chloe's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You were protecting yourselves. You wanted a servant, not a daughter. You set her up, and you set me up to be the villain in her story. Did you ever once think about what you were asking her to give up? Her job, her life, her future?" My father stood up, his face dark with fury. "You are being hysterical. After everything we have done for you. What you've done." Chloe laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You've trapped us all. You drove my sister away, and you've turned this house into a prison. I never learned how to do this on my own because you promised me I wouldn't have to. You promised me Alara. You didn't prepare me for motherhood, you tried to buy me a nanny with my sister's life." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For the first time, they had no counter-argument. They couldn't blame my absence when the very person they were helping was throwing their lies back in their faces. Their carefully constructed narrative, where they were the benevolent saviors and I was the ungrateful child, had been completely dismantled, not by me, but by the golden child herself. The illusion was not just shattered, it was annihilated. They were left standing in the rubble, finally forced to see the wreckage they had created. The aftermath of Chloe's confrontation was a profound and unnerving silence. The shouting had ceased, but the quiet that followed was heavier than any argument. My parents, Helen and Richard, were finally defeated. There was no one left to blame. The narrative they had so carefully constructed had been publicly denounced by its intended beneficiary. They were left with only the cold, hard facts. Their daughters were estranged, their finances were strained, and their home felt less like a castle and more like a beautifully decorated cage. It was Chloe who took the first step into this new, uncertain reality. A week after the fight, armed with a newfound, fragile independence, she did what my parents had failed to do. She didn't try to force or demand. She searched online, not for me, but for Liam, my old college friend. She remembered his name from years ago. Finding his public photography page, she sent him a short, humble message. "I know this is a long shot, but if you are in contact with Alara, can you please pass this on? It's important. I just want to talk." Liam, ever my loyal guardian, forwarded it to me with the caption, "The ball is in your court." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart a confusing mix of apprehension and curiosity. I agreed, but on my terms. A video call. No parents. When Chloe's face appeared on my screen, she looked different. The entitled sparkle was gone, replaced by a weary maturity. The first few moments were painfully awkward. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Hi, Chloe." Then, the dam broke. She began to speak, not with excuses, but with a raw, stumbling honesty. "I am so sorry, Alara. I was so wrapped up in myself, in what Mom and Dad were promising me. I never stopped to think about you, about what they were asking you to sacrifice. I read your letter. You were right. It wasn't fair. It was cruel." She took a shaky breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me. And I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to hear me say it. I miss my sister." Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time in years, I believed her. I saw not the golden child, but a young woman who had been just as manipulated as I was, albeit in a different way. "I miss you too," I admitted, the words feeling true as I said them. That call didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. We started talking more, slowly rebuilding a relationship, sister to sister, without our parents' influence as a toxic intermediary. Chloe started taking charge of her own life. She enrolled in an online course, hired a part-time babysitter she paid for with her own dwindling influencer money, and began to learn, truly learning, how to be Lily's mother. A month later, I received an email from my father. The tone was alien to me. It was stripped of all authority and demand. It was short, and it was weak. "Alara. Your mother and I hope you are well. We were wrong. We miss you. Dad." There was no request to come home, no justification for their actions. It was the sound of complete and utter surrender. The illusion of control was gone, and in its place was the hollow echo of their loss. I replied a week later, my response polite but firm. I told them I was happy in building a successful life for myself. I explained that if we were ever to have a relationship again, it would have to be built on a new foundation of respect for my autonomy. There would be no more demands, no more assumptions. They could know me as I was, or not at all. The power dynamic had been irrevocably inverted. They could no longer control me, so their only choice was to accept my terms or live with the silence. They were left in their big, quiet house, grappling with the consequences of their actions. They had my parents, Helen and Richard, had tried to trap me, to reduce my life to a function of their own needs. They had believed their control was absolute. But by vanishing, I had done more than just escape. I had held up a mirror, forcing them to see the truth of their own manipulation. And in doing so, I had inadvertently handed Chloe the key to her own liberation. The shattering of their illusion didn't just set me free, it forced them all to confront reality, paving the way for something new, something fragile and uncertain, but for the first time, something real. As I looked out my window at the city skyline, a landscape I had chosen, I knew I was finally, truly, in control of my own story.